Behind those glittering wedding photos of Elvis Presley, the ones the world still calls a fairy tale, there was a storm no camera could capture. Just hours before walking down the aisle, the king whispered 5 chilling words. Words so heavy they cracked the very smile the world believed was genuine. In this video, we'll peel back the polished image and step into the shadows of that day, uncovering a truth so startling it will forever change how you see Elvis and his so-called fairy tale wedding. But the revelation won't come right away. Stay with us, because when it does, it will stop you in your tracks. When Elvis Presley first laid eyes on Phesily Wept, she was just 14 years old, a shy teenager swept into the orbit of the most famous man on the planet. Their relationship unfolded quietly at first, hidden behind the curtain of Elvis's fame, but it didn't stay secret for long. By the time she was 15, Phesily had moved into his world, an arrangement that raised eyebrows but was carefully managed to appear innocent. For 7 long years, their unconventional love story played out in the shadows, building toward the moment the world had been waiting for. The day Elvis and Phesily finally said, "I do." On May 1st, 1967, that moment arrived, and the images beamed around the globe looked like something out of a Hollywood dream. Elvis in a sharp black tuxedo, Phesily in her sparkling white gown, the two of them locked in a picture-perfect kiss that made headlines everywhere. The wedding reception was extravagant, filled with laughter, music, and a $10,000 breakfast spread that seemed almost as dazzling as the couple themselves. For millions of fans, it was the culmination of a love story straight out of a storybook. The king of rock and roll had found his queen, and the whole world was invited to celebrate. But those photographs and glowing reports only told part of the story. Behind the carefully staged smiles and tightly choreographed moments, there was another truth lurking in the shadows. The fairy tale everyone believed in had cracks running deep beneath its polished surface. And if you look closely, past the glitz and glamour, you'll begin to see the faint trace of sorrow behind Elvis's eyes. Clues to a hidden heartbreak that would only reveal itself years later. Among the few people who truly saw Elvis Presley behind closed doors was Alberta Holman, his longtime housekeeper and cook. She had been with the Presley family for years, long enough to earn a playful nickname from Elvis himself, Alberta VO5, after his favorite hair product. To him, she wasn't just staff. She was a steady presence, a comforting figure who reminded him of the simple warmth he once had with his mother. Whenever the weight of fame grew too heavy, Alberta was often the one who quietly prepared his favorite meals and offered the kind of unspoken support only someone deeply trusted could give. But on the morning of his wedding, Alberta stumbled upon a side of Elvis that almost no one else had ever witnessed. She found the king not with a confident smile or commanding presence, but alone, his head bowed, and his body shaking as silent tears ran down his face. It was a moment so raw and jarring that it stood in stark contrast to the glittering images the world would soon see. For Alberta, who had cared for him through moments of joy and sorrow, this was different. This was despair, heavy and unshakable, resting on the shoulders of the man millions believed had everything. As she tried to comfort him, Elvis spoke words that would stay with her forever, haunting words that revealed just how powerless he felt in that moment. The contradiction was staggering. Here was Elvis Presley, adored by millions, wealthy beyond imagination, a cultural icon who could command any stage, and yet, he sat there feeling cornered, as though he had no escape. What could possibly trap the most powerful entertainer in the world into such anguish? That chilling answer would come later, but even before the vows were spoken, the seeds of heartbreak had already been sown. From the outside, it may have seemed like Elvis had the freedom to do whatever he pleased. After all, he was the king. But behind the glittering image, unseen pressures were quietly mounting. One of the most significant came from Phesily's father, who had never been entirely comfortable with his teenage daughter living under the same roof as a world-famous superstar. Whispers spread that he had considered taking legal action, accusing Elvis of transporting a minor across state lines. The weight of such a threat, and the scandal it could unleash, loomed like a shadow over their relationship, no matter how carefully Elvis tried to keep it hidden. Then there were the rumors, claims that Phesily herself might have threatened to expose private details of their early relationship if Elvis refused to marry her. She would go on to deny such accusations, and perhaps rightly so, but even the hint of those stories created unease. For a man whose career relied on a carefully polished public image, the thought of personal secrets spilling into the headlines would have been more than just embarrassing. It could have been devastating. With his every move scrutinized by the press, Elvis was constantly aware that the wrong story in the wrong hands might damage not just his career, but his entire legacy. And hovering over it all was Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager and the architect of so many of his career moves. Parker made his position clear. The relationship either needed to move forward to marriage, or it needed to end. To him, the ambiguity was a liability, something that could become a distraction in the public eye. Either get married or move on, he reportedly said, a line that cut through any illusion of choice. And so, the question lingers like an echo. Why would Elvis Presley, the most powerful entertainer in the world, feel like his back was against the wall, convinced he had no choice at all? When the wedding day finally arrived, it unfolded with a swiftness that felt almost surreal. The ceremony itself lasted barely 8 minutes, an astonishingly brief affair for a couple whose relationship had stretched on for 7 long years. Only 14 guests were allowed inside, a small circle that excluded many of the people who had been by Elvis's side through thick and thin. The moment that should have been intimate and sacred was reduced to something quick and efficient, as though the vows were simply one item on a checklist to be completed before the next engagement. No sooner had Elvis and Priscilla exchanged rings than they were whisked away to face a press conference, one that seemed to carry more weight than the vows themselves. The cameras flashed, reporters fired off questions, and the newlyweds were pushed into performing happiness for the world to see. What should have been the private glow of a couple's first moments as husband and wife was instead overshadowed by the need to put on a show. The headlines the next day would focus more on the spectacle, the dazzling reception, the glamorous photographs, the carefully curated image, than on the fleeting words that bound them together. And for some of Elvis's closest friends, the wedding felt like a betrayal. Red West, a loyal companion from the very beginning of Elvis's career, was not only excluded from the ceremony, but had once asked Elvis to stand as his best man, a request that now seemed bitterly ironic. His anger over the slight ran so deep that he resigned from working with Elvis altogether. Behind the glitter of champagne glasses and the glow of flashing bulbs, cracks in loyalty and trust were already splintering. The world saw a fairy tale, but those closest to Elvis knew the reality. A day built to impress the cameras, even as unease festered just out of sight. For all his fame and charisma, Elvis carried with him a deeply complicated view of intimacy, one that often left those closest to him bewildered. He was known to have an unusual fixation on purity, insisting that Priscilla remain untouched throughout the many years they were together before marriage. To outsiders, their relationship may have looked like a grand romance, but behind the doors of Graceland, it was carefully shaped by Elvis's need for control. He drew strict boundaries around their physical closeness, boundaries that spoke less of passion and more of an obsession with keeping Priscilla in a role that only he could define. To Elvis, Priscilla was not just his partner. She was the embodiment of innocence, the little girl he could mold and protect. That image became central to how he related to her, and when she became pregnant shortly after their marriage, everything began to shift. The pregnancy shattered the illusion he had carefully maintained, forcing him to confront a reality he seemed unprepared to face. The woman he once saw as untouched and childlike was suddenly transforming into a mother, and that change struck at the heart of Elvis's idealized vision. What should have been a moment of joy for the couple became instead a turning point that drove an even deeper wedge between them. Years later, Priscilla would look back on those moments with a striking honesty. In an interview with Barbara Walters, she admitted that Elvis struggled profoundly to reconcile the two sides of her life, the mother she became and the youthful figure he had always wanted her to remain. "I didn't know it then," she confessed, "but that's what I realized in later years, that he was a father to me." Her words peeled back the curtain on a relationship marked by contradictions, love and control, tenderness and distance, devotion and despair. It was a dynamic that not only shaped their marriage, but also revealed how fragile the bond between them truly was, even in the eyes of the world's most celebrated couple. At the heart of this story lies a moment so raw and revealing that it cuts through all the glitter and charm of Elvis's public life. On the morning of his wedding, with the world expecting a glowing groom ready to embrace his fairy tale day, Elvis confided in the one person who happened to stumble upon his despair, Alberta Holman. She had known him long enough to see past the bravado, long enough to recognize when something was terribly wrong. And on that morning, what she saw was not the king of rock and roll, but a man weighed down by a burden he could no longer hide. When Alberta asked him why he seemed so broken on what should have been the happiest day of his life, Elvis answered with a line that revealed everything and nothing all at once. His voice, heavy with resignation, carried 5 words that would haunt both her memory and the story of his life. "I don't have a choice." Those words, stripped of glamour or grandeur, spoke volumes about the turmoil boiling beneath his calm exterior. They were the quiet confession of a man who, despite his fame and power, felt cornered in a way the world would never imagine. And so, while the cameras later captured his radiant smile, the tender kiss, and the picture-perfect embrace with his bride, another truth remained hidden. Those 5 silent words became the invisible shadow behind every photograph, the untold chapter beneath the headlines of joy. The world saw a celebration, but Elvis's whisper told a different story, one of conflict, sorrow, and a choice that felt more like surrender than triumph. It was a haunting reminder that even kings can be trapped in cages the public never sees. If this glimpse into the hidden side of Elvis's story has caught your attention, there's so much more waiting to be uncovered. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next untold chapter of the king's life. Don't forget to like this video if it kept you hooked, and most importantly, I'd love to hear what you think. Share your thoughts, opinions, or even your own Elvis memories down in the comments section. Your voice keeps these stories alive, and your support helps bring more of them to light.